That's good.
Oh, good.
Number 17. It's just,
Are we only on 17?
yeah.
Oh, gosh, we better get going. Okay.
Well, that one for 2 weeks.
Yeah, no.
I feel like we should start it off with a bit of Macbeth or something. When shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, red?
17, you say? Okay. Gosh. Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted episode 17. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
Well, we're taking a slightly different approach this week because my beautiful stepdaughter, Emily, who's 25, she's not a Christian, she's not a Catholic, but she has started going to the Alpha course, the Catholic Alpha course, and she's come to me with a very big question, which we thought it would be a good place to tackle it here on Catholic Unscripted. And so, guys, I've shared it with you. Essentially, she's asking what is the point of our existence? What is the purpose? Why did God create us? And is it just to be happy and to love God? And she can understand why people believe in a God, but she can't understand why God would create human beings, especially when she looks around and sees the amount of suffering that goes on. So it's a huge question, and I thought it would be good if we could try and answer her. Hello, Emily. Thank you for your question. So I'll start with you, Mark. What would you say to her?
Well, I thought it was a brilliant question and really sort of sums up the whole mission and purpose of, faith. So it is really worth addressing. And the main thing that I think to sort of start off with is to say that in order to understand that, you have to understand that, like the fundamental ontology, that being is good. You have to start from that. So I suppose you could say we could start by looking at Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am," and the fact that was an actual reversal, perhaps, of Aquinas, who said that "I am, therefore I think." In other words, being comes before action. So you have to start with a fundamental premise that being is good, and we see that in Genesis, don't we? That at the beginning of the Bible, everything that's created is good. God says that he created everything, and what he saw was good. So we get that idea that being, first of all, is good. And then I think you have to think about love as well, and that we can look at the way that we experience love in our families and in our marriages, and that love is generative. That's the nature of love. It is abundant. It gives of itself, and so God had no need to create us for any purpose other than the fact that love shares. Love is good. Love breaks out. Love is abundant, and so he wanted to share that goodness, that existence with us. And then I think you have to look at, Emily sort of asked what, there was a plan, and was that plan for everything to be good? And we see from Scripture, that was the plan. The plan was that we would work in unity with God, and, that's how we would exist. But then something happened, and we call that the fall. And that something was that humanity chose to make our own decisions, that we didn't need to follow what God says, that we would have the freedom to make up our own mind about what actual good and evil is. And that's what we call the fall. And that's what led to sin being in the world. Because the reality is that we need an objective truth. Everything isn't relative. And obviously we see that in our broken, our broken society increasingly today, where the impingement of relativism, where you've got a situation where everything is based on your feelings, not on facts, leads to a complete breakdown of society and relationship. And, we're getting into all kinds of messy trouble. So, and the medicine for that was Jesus, "Oh, Felix culpa, oh, happy error, oh, happy fall," is one of the things that's said about that fall. So that led Jesus to be incarnated, to come into the world to save us. And that's part of the, I suppose you have to think then about the struggles that we all have. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this today, about the way that it's very difficult to see that, I think, when you're perhaps starting out in your spiritual journey, when you're starting out in your journey of faith, because you perhaps lack the experience of living your life with Jesus. And so you think, well, it's arbitrary, you know, good things happen, bad things happen, it's arbitrary. But usually I would say that bad things happen, it tends to be because of choices that we make. Sometimes it is a bit more arbitrary. But what you learn is that when you're living your life with Jesus, then you can handle those things, and that they have meaning, and that meaning usually helps you to help other people, or to have some special insight, and it adds to the rich tapestry, and it makes you more of a person. So there's meaning in suffering, as well as in all the goodness that we enjoy in our lives. And so fundamentally, I think what I would say is life is fantastic, and it's more fantastic when you live it in faith, because you recognize what a wonderful gift it all is, and that the curveballs that are thrown at you are learning experiences and opportunities. And the goal, what's the goal? The goal is to be with Christ, with God, and to, you know, enter into that. So we're journeying into the Trinity, which is perfect communion. So it's all about journeying together in love and learning how to be in perfect communion with each other. How's that in a nutshell?
How's that? Not bad. I thought that's beautiful. That idea of that abundance of love, that it's not out of a need or a lack. And this is why we understand God as Trinity, one God in three persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the lover, the beloved, and the relationship between them. And then that abundance of love then leads to this creation that is good, and humans made in God's image and likeness who are very good. Only we are made in his image and likeness. So love is absolutely at the root of it. Gavin, what answer can you give to my Emily?
Well, it's the biggest question there is. And expecting us to answer it is really very difficult. But I think I'd start off, well, and it has to be answered in stereo. And the stereo is, from one side, there's our experience, and from the other side, there are ideas that make sense. And the problem is, you need to know who's asking the question. Some people want answers to the ideas, and other people want answers to the experience. But let's go with the experience to begin with. So we're clearly animals. We're no different from the animals to look at. We get born, we die, we copulate and have children, we eat and drink, and that's it. But we're animals with a problem. And the problem is that, unlike animals, we've got this compulsion to ask the question why. Call it consciousness, this extra part of the brain. And the problem is, the moment you start asking why, there are some things make sense and other things don't make sense. So it's a real problem that for the whole of time and space, we weren't here. And then suddenly we're born and we live in this twinkling of an eye, and then we're gone again forever. But in the meantime, we're asking, what am I doing here? I mean, that's real incongruity. And that's part of the human condition. And that's the question that Emily's asking. The Anglo-Saxons, before they met Christ, had this lovely picture of a barn, and a bird flew in from the dark in the winter into the barn that was lit. There were no windows in those days, no glass windows, and flew through the barn out into the darkness the other side. And they said, yep, that's like life. We've no idea what lies either side of the barn, but you might as well hope the bird has a good time while it's flying through in the warmth. But that isn't enough, of course, because whilst we're asking why, we've got two different drives going on in us. And one is that we like to be in control. And if we're not in control, we can feel very, very panicky or very depressed. And the other is we like to be loved. And the problem with that is that those two things don't go together. You can't exercise control and love. They work against each other. You have to choose between loving and being loved, or exercising control. And most people in their lives they opt for one. But if you then go say, well, here I am asking why, not knowing what's gone before or afterwards, but with these two appetites. So what would God look like if he's there? I mean, first of all, is there a mind behind the universe, or is this all coincidence? Well, any scientist would say this is not coincidence. This is not, there's no accident here. There's a huge sense of coherent thought gone into how everything interrelates together. The maths in itself is enough to show that. So then there's a mind. Well, what's the mind like? Is the mind personal or impersonal? Well, if you think it's impersonal, then you go for Buddhism, and Buddhism is a very good way of dealing with the idea of an impersonal mind. But you don't get love and you don't get personality as part of that. They both have to get wiped out if you just go for the non-personal mind. So if that's not good enough because you think your personality matters, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm not a Buddhist is because the most exciting things about life are the people I meet. My personality is quite problematic, but it matters to me. And I really like other people's personalities. So if there was no personality behind the universe, I wouldn't know how to make sense of my interest in people. So let's assume that there's a personality. In that case, we need to be able to meet the personality. So, or else it's an unkind personality. So if there's a complete absence of God, then he's an unkind God. But then why would we be kind? So why would be this complete disconnect between an unkind mind and our longing for kindness? So let's assume he's kind, and if he's kind, he'd want us to know he's there. So in what way might he come to meet us? Well, he might come to meet us on our own terms. Parents get down on their knees with babies. Owners get down on their knees with dogs. We get down there so that the people we love know we're here. So what would happen if God got down on his knees and introduced himself to us? He'd come as a human being. Is there a human being who claims to be God coming down? Oh, it's Jesus. Oh, well, let's talk about Jesus then. What does Jesus bring us? If we looked at why we're here through the life of Jesus, what would it look like? And then Jesus says that you've been made with free will in order to be loved, and there's going to be a problem. Because if God wants to give you love, you've got to choose him. But if you choose him, you might choose the wrong thing, or else you're a robot. So if you're going to choose the wrong thing, then things are going to go wrong. And that's where the spoiling comes in. It's because we choose the wrong things. And the Bible is this wonderful story, which mythically, as in it tells a profound story that applies to universally to everyone. That's what a myth is. And it talks about our two ancestors who decided they wanted to be in control more than they wanted to be loved. And that's all our story. So we've all fallen away from God by choosing control and pride in our own way. And God has to come and get us back. And he has to do that by making the love stronger than the control. And that's what happens when we meet Jesus. When people who become Christians, because they meet Jesus, they don't know who he is entirely, but they're astonished that he makes everything better, like a fantastic parent. He heals the dead. He forgives people their sins. He gives them hope. He's a light in the darkness. His love is more powerful than all the tricks people play, all the self-deceptions. And his words ring more true than anybody else's words. And when you start reading the Gospels, you think, actually, this may be God got down on his knees, come to meet me. And then for me, there are a couple of other things. I couldn't believe in a God who didn't go through what we go through. And one of the hardest things to believe is that it was worth it. Mother Julian, a mystic who lived in about 1480, had an experience of Jesus when she had an out-of-the-body thing. And she said to him, Lord, did you know what you were doing? This is the Emily question. Are you really sure you knew what you were doing when you set all this up? There's so much suffering. That she lived through the Black Death and the Inquisition and people being burnt. It was a bad time in the late 1400s. And she was a hermit in a church. And the Lord said, I do. You've just got to take it on trust. When we get to the end of this, you'll discover that love is stronger than hate, that everything that's gone wrong, I will make go right. There'll be, and you'll see, and you'll say in the end, oh yeah, it really was worth it. So there's an element of trust in between. And one of the things you do as being a Christian is you put your hand into Christ's hand and you say, okay, let's do this together. I trust you. And I was a Christian for a period of 48 hours. I hate being gullible. I hate being taken for a ride. So I really wasn't willing to trust God for more than a couple of days at a time, which involved saying my prayers and living out the gospel. And as I did that, I began to discover the ground under my feet got stronger. The light got clearer. the map made more sense. So you can't do this theoretically. You either have to go with Jesus or not go with him. And if you've been not going with him, then you know what that's like. So then you try going with him, and then you see what that's like. And one of the reasons the three of us are here is because we fell in love with Jesus. And it all makes so much sense when you listen to his voice. You follow the way he sent you. You experience what he came to give you, which is a touch of heaven now. So this hunger we have for love, you begin to get like a smell in your nostrils or a tune in your ears. You hear the music, you smell the thing, you taste the thing, and you're on the track of it. And we're heading to heaven as fast as we can in his company. So that's the way I would answer why we're here, what are we doing here, and what are our options.
That's very good.
I suppose the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the freedom and foreknowledge, which I kind of feel comes into it. Like when Emily says that, why is there all this suffering? And did God know that he was creating us with all this suffering? And that's another huge theological question, isn't it? The freedom and foreknowledge thing, which, I think the answer is that God is a risk taker, that he does know. So the way that I've always explained it is that, so I wonder if we should talk about the question first. The question is, if God knows everything that's going to happen, why does he let bad things happen, or why does he let the bad things happen? And obviously it's about choice. I mean, people really struggle with these ideas, don't they? But I personally never really have. It always kind of made sense to me. And the way that I like to think about it is that, our linear time, we experience time in a linear way. And time for us is chronological, isn't it? But time for God is chirological, which means that he experiences every moment simultaneously or at the same time. And the same would be true for angels. So time is contingent in creation. So we experience time in a linear way, but God experiences it in a different sort of a way. And the way that God experiences it, I think the best way to explain it is if you can imagine time and space as a map spread out, and we are going through a tunnel, and we're seeing what's every event as it occurs and happens to us. And then if you imagine God is viewing it as a plan, so he's looking down on the map and he can see all the possible routes and options that we could take, and he allows us. He's a risk taker. He's giving us the information to make the right choices, but allowing us to find our own way through the maze ourselves. So that sort of answers why does he allow these things to happen? But obviously, if he didn't, it wouldn't be freedom, would it? It would be another form of control, as Gavin said. And that's why it's important that we're allowed to make these errors.
So we're doing this in stereo, and that was the rational principle explanation, and it was a very, very good one indeed. But you need to put something else with it, and that is there is no rational answer that will satisfy our outrage at suffering. There just isn't, especially if you're suffering. Imagine that you've got the most terrible toothache, and someone says, "Yeah, but it'll get better tomorrow." You can't hear it, you can't feel it. The pain is too much. And so there are some times in life when the pain is too much and no rational answer can help us, no matter how clever Mark and I are. But at that point, it's only by looking at Jesus on the cross. That's why the crucifix is in church. What you discover there is that there is no suffering that God has not gone through. So Jesus on the cross is not just someone being put to death and dying for our sins. In it, he experiences all the toxicity of the universe, all the rebellion, all the despair. It's almost as if the whole of human despair is poured all over him, and he has to experience it. There's nothing that we have gone through that God has not gone through himself when Jesus is on the cross. Accusation, despair, pain, hopelessness, misery, being overcome. But because, and so when all we can do sometimes when we're dealing with suffering is to complain to him and saying, "This is a very raw deal. I don't agree with it. And, I'd like out, please. And I don't understand it." And what on earth do you think you're doing? There was an awful moment in my life when things went very badly wrong. And on my way, I cycled on my way to work, and I did most of my praying at a very busy part of a dual carriageway, because at that point I shouted at God. I basically said, "What the effing H do you think you're up to? This is completely unsustainable." And I could only do it on my bike on the dual carriageway, because then nobody could hear me. It didn't look good for a clergyman to be having that outrageously angry conversation with God. So it had to be a bicycle, had to be a dual carriageway. And then I was able to tell him just what a lousy job I thought he was making of my life. But then you look at Jesus, and God says, but I've been there. There's no hopelessness. There's no despair. There's no complexity. There's nothing that you're going through that I haven't drunk more deeply from. And the reason, so you're not alone. And I think that's the only answer to suffering that we can cope with provisionally. You're not alone in all this, and I'll get you through it. And if that's what you hear and feel when you see Jesus on the cross, then you can kind of manage anything. And then you've got a lot of people who've done their bicycling on dual carriageways at the other end and say, yeah, actually, he saw me through. It was worth it. There was an answer. There is a way through. One of the things I did as a university chaplain was to listen to people who come into my office and say, I think I'm going to have to kill myself. I can't manage this. And human beings we're very fragile, in fact. I mean, we're both very strong and very fragile at the same time. But the moment we get the sense that first of all, we matter, and secondly, there is a way through, it's not hopeless. It's the sucking of hope. The person I think who described that best was J.K. Rowling in the Harry Potter books. The Dementors are one of the very best theological examples of how evil gets to us by sucking out the love and the hope, so that we then get extinguished. And what Jesus does on the cross is always make sure that we have hope, because we look at what they did to God, and then we see that he rose on the third day and starts making everyone better. He raises other people from the dead. He forgives their sins. He goes ahead. He's basically stronger than anything that random evil can throw at humanity. So with that hope and with that love and with that promise, we can usually make it through. But there are times when you have to get on a bicycle and talk at the top of your voice to God to explain to him why you think it's gone wrong.
I think it's interesting when you look at Jesus in Scripture as well. The times when he gets angry, what is he getting angry at? And he's getting angry at evil. That's what he gets angry at in Scripture. You know, so it's like he rejects evil. He rejects suffering, and he does that all through the gospel story. One of my favourite quotes is Claudel. Do you know the French theologian? And he said that Jesus didn't come to take away suffering or to explain it. He came to fill it with his presence. Yeah, and that's a beautiful explanation of what you're saying. And the other thing, I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that picture?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Have you seen that before, Gavin? I think that's a lovely image of, you know, like the guy with the nails and the hammer, and Jesus is sort of holding him up, which to me, that sort of explains, you know, we create our own pain in a way, and Jesus just carries us through it all, you know, irrespective of how awful we are sometimes, you know.
Emily probably knows. Does Emily know the footprints story? The single line of feet in the sand. Is she likely to have heard that?
She's likely to have heard it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that doesn't need repeating. Then.
Well,
I mean, Google.
She can look it up.
Yes.
We can go through it together. I'll put it on a link. But I think that idea of love is not love if it's forced. I think that's absolutely crucial, because by its very nature, you cannot force it. And that necessarily means, so people have this idea of this inconsistent triad, you know, how come God doesn't stop evil? Can't he do it? It's not down to that kind of simplistic question. It's about whether or not he's created us freely out of love, and he has. And so that comes with that consequence, which is that we will choose to turn against him. And we also have to live in a world in which choice is possible. So we have to live in a world with fixed laws of nature that mean if I want to push Gavin over a cliff, I can do it and he won't just hover. And so all of this leads to this suffering that we see and that we experience. But what I love about our faith is that, unlike other religions that came to offer a solution, that came to give a book, that came to give some suggestions or some guidance or some ways to follow, with Christianity, God gives himself. He doesn't give, you know, here take this, or the fulfillment of his revelation is Christ, who in preparing the Jewish people for him, as you say, lowering himself to be so humble as to become one of us and to die and to suffer in that way. He gave himself. You can't get more. You cannot. There is no other story. There is no other story that answers that question, and where God himself suffered the worst that we could suffer, and the end of that story is the resurrection. So I think what Emily's asked is the most pertinent question, which is, what is the point of anything? What is the point of us existing at all? Why? And actually, it's because not enough people are asking that question that we see the chaos around us and the incoherence around us. And actually what we do, and I think Emily would admit she does this and I do it and we all are guilty of it, is we distract ourselves constantly because we're frightened to ask that question. And so the very fact that Emily, God love her, has come to this point where she's saying, what is the point of life, is the beginning of being able to then accept the answer, which is to love God, to return to our Creator, who is love. But yes, I think that idea of love is not love if it's forced answers the question of pain and suffering, and then God who gives himself.
And of course, so much depends. Sorry, Catherine. So much depends on where you're asking the question from. If you're asking it from a good place, where you're just kind of scratching your head and thinking, "Well, I need to find some answers," then I think the answers come at you in one direction. But sometimes the question gets asked when you're going down, and it's a bit late to ask the question. But if you are going down, there's a lovely story. But humanity falls into a river and begins to drown, and then begins to ask some theological questions, and the atheists shout out and just hear an empty echo back when they cry for help. There is no one there. There is no help. But if you call out as a Jew, then Moses appears and says, "Well, I've got some tablets here which explain 10 easy steps from not falling into a river in the first place." And you think, well, that would be a good idea, but too late. But then you call out for Jesus and you hear a splash, and suddenly someone's got you and they're carrying you and saving you. And that again is one of the reasons why people become Christians, because if you're asking the question when you fall in the river and you're having trouble floating and surviving, that's when Jesus really comes to the front of the queue in terms of answers and experiences for managing. But if you're asking it from a good place, then there's still the whole issue of what satisfies you most. And most people sitting down quietly being asked, would you like to be loved and to love, or would you like to be a dictator? And make everybody do what you want, realizes that the being a dictator and making people do what you want is something that would leave us very empty and very lonely inside. And actually, one of the deepest human problems is loneliness. Because back to Emily's question, why are we here? Well, we were made to be loved and to love, and we do it as a kind of proxy for one another. It's wonderful when you have three friends and you care and you love each other, but it's a foretaste of God's love for us. We're acting out this deeper and more profound love that stands at the beginning and the end of creation, and beginning and the end of time. So we're practicing love on each other. But to do that, you absolutely have to learn how to forgive, and you can only forgive if you've been forgiven. And you absolutely have to have hope, but you can only have hope if you've been hopeless and then discovered where the hope comes from. So once again, it partly depends on where you're asking these questions from a place of very serious and acute need, or from a place of stability. But you tend to need to ask them from both angles.
That's brilliant. And like leading on from that, I'd say is, and perhaps it's in, I think Emily said she was reading Mere Christianity. Yeah. I think one of the things in Mere Christianity is about our innate appetite, and the way that it would be ridiculous if we had these appetites and there was no, I mean, it's a bit platonic, isn't it? But you know, that there weren't these ideals that we were hungry for. So, for example, in our humanity, if we experienced hunger and there was no food, that would be ridiculous. And in the same way, if we hunger for justice or love or relationship, as you're saying, Gavin, and that I always think when I'm talking to people who are journeying towards Christ, you know, on RCIA or whatever, that, you know, to say, what do you hunger for? We all have an innate hunger for justice, for love, for integrity, for honor, you know. True. And even though we get confused in our lives with all these other things, if these are the prime things that we all long for, that we long to see, we all feel injustice, we all feel you know, a lack of mercy, or you know, the need for honor. We're all looking for an honourable leader. We're all quick to criticise. So I think all of these things are pointers. They show us, don't they, that the way that what we should be looking at really is God. And just as you said, Katherine, that what you just said there, right, about the big questions, that is the introduction to Christianity by Joseph Ratzinger. Did you know that? That's the beginning of the book. That's how he starts, with exactly that preamble. He's sort of saying, you know, these are the questions, and when you ask those questions, there are, you know, brilliant. Like you have to look into these things to find the answer. Yeah. And it made me think of, you know, like I was with you on Tuesday and give a little talk in your parish, and it made me think of that idea really that, you know, I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. What did it remind me of? Oh no,
Pope Ratzinger, Pope Benedict.
Going along.
So annoying.
I knew I'd forget one of them.
I do that.
Anyway, it reminded me of something we said there, but that was pertinent. Please move on.
I was just going to say that two things we've said here today, which I think are really important. One is continue to ask questions. I think it's only in the asking questions, and Jesus never ever dismissed a question or turned people away. He welcomed them. So we must continue to ask questions, and that's how we come to truth, only that way. And also being angry. Gavin spoke about pulling up on the side of the road on a bike. We've all done it, and we will continue to do it and to wrestle and to grapple throughout our lives. And I don't think that we should give the impression that as Christians we have to always be nice and never annoyed, even with God himself, because you can't hide from God anyway. So, you know, I often get angry with God, and do as Gavin did as well, and possibly not always out of earshot though.
Well, think about the great prophets. You know, like I always think of Jacob at the Jabbok as sort of a metaphor for my life. You know, but you know, think about Jonah as well, like running away. I love Jonah. You know, when God says, Jonah, up and go to Nineveh, and Jonah's like, see you later, and he's off on a boat somewhere or something, running as far away as he can. Yeah. So, yeah. And actually, I remember
marvelous moment when, sorry, you remember it. Go on, your memory is more important.
Well, I was just it was about efficacy. Do you remember I was saying about, like, I think one of the things that really bugged me, and this might like strike a chord with Emily, is that some of this chat seems a bit abstract, doesn't it? Sometimes the theology can seem a bit abstract, but if we can locate it in the efficacious effect that it has on our life. And like, that's what you were saying. You know, I love that bit, Gavin, about the river, and the fact that, like, it's trying to communicate the fact that living a life of faith does have a real tangible effect on our lives. And it can seem really abstract from an external perspective, and it's only really living a life in faith, isn't it? It takes some time of practice before you get to the point where you're like, you can feel Jesus walking with you in a way that is practical and effective, and you trust that you can rely on him to help you, you know God is there. And it's such a powerful thing about faith, and I wish I could give it as a gift to everyone.
Yeah.
There's another picture I'd like to give. I'm a sailor, or I used to be a sailor, and you sit in harbour and all these boats with masts and shrouds and halyards slapping and the wind coming. And if you just took things,
I think it was a pirate.
If you just looked at these boats by themselves with the wind and single anchor, you'd say, well, what are these boats for? And the answer is they all have sails in them. And it's only when you put the sail up and you set the sails properly, and then suddenly these inert pieces of wood become like seahorses. And the thing is, the sails are faith. And so human beings are like boats sitting at anchor with wind and wondering, well, what's the point? Where are we going? You're not going anywhere until you pull your sails out. Then you hoist the sails, and then the wind, which is the Holy Spirit, has got something to grab onto. It grabs onto our faith like a sail, and then it begins to push us along. And then you discover you start living life in the Spirit. You live the life you were designed to. And all Christians will tell you that the difference between living in the Spirit and living by faith and not is like the difference between being alive and not being alive. There's a kind of, we're only half people before we come alive in the Spirit. Jesus in fact describes it as being born again. It's like there's a new dimension, and when you put your humanity into this new dimension of faith, you go, that's what I'm for. So the answer to your question is, you can't know what you're for until you raise the sail and start sailing and start doing it. And then you'll say, I, Emily, have discovered what I'm for, as God comes into your life and makes you a full and a whole person. But until that happens, you're quite right to say, what am I for? It doesn't make sense like this, because it doesn't.
I'm going to have to make a note of that one, because I normally say the same thing, right? Like I would say, it's like a washing machine without if you don't look at the manual and you put rocks in it, then it's only when you use something for its own, for the proper purposes. And the trouble is, we've almost forgotten that now, haven't we? We've forgotten that these things, that we're made for God, and and so it seems incongruous to try and fit those two things together. And this is the joy of evangelisation. Surely, this is, if anyone's watching that hasn't experienced that, that's why we've got to go and spread the good news, because it's such an extraordinary truth, and so many people it's absent from their lives, and it's when you've experienced it, it's something that you're joyful about and you want to share with other people.
Yeah, it's totally and utterly transformative. It changes everything. It changes how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see the world, how you understand your creation, your existence. It absolutely changes everything. And I think also Emily is a neuroscientist. She has a scientific mind, but a philosophical head as well. Sorry, Emily, to talk about you. I hope you're watching and agree with that. But I think the thing is, pause, hang on. I've forgotten now.
Oh no, it's catching.
Yeah, it's catching.
The only one who never does is Gavin.
Yeah, of course. Gavin wouldn't, would he? What was I just saying? It's transformative.
Yeah, the transformation.
You were explaining that we're not the same before and afterwards, that it's worth it, that something happens to you, but you were then going to look at the whole phenomenon from presumably a neuroscientific or rational point of view, from Emily's point of view.
Gavin's so good, he can not just say what you've said, but what you're about to say as well. Well, no, I'm not. I can't look at it from a scientific point of view. I think what I was going to say, I've just remembered, is that we have lost that idea of finality, of telos, and that's partly down to this scientism, that we look at the world and we look at the efficiency, what we're made of, the materiality, what we're made of, and how we came to be, how things were put together. And what we've lost is that Aristotelian idea of formal and final cause. And that's what I think we have to try and recover, especially that idea of finality, that idea of telos. It's just not even on many people's, horizon.
Radar.
I think one of the things I'd like to say to a neuroscientist again is the principle of stereo. So scientists are immensely skilled in how things work. They have the most ornate maps of connectivity and traction, of cause and effect. But there are two ways but human beings need two kinds of knowledge. They need how, but they also need why. So if they only have why, but they have no how, then we have no way of making things work. We live like Stone Age hunter-gatherers, which is all very good, but it's problematic. But if you only have how, and know why, then you live like computers. And so the artist needs a bit of neuroscience so that he or she is not forever stuck with philosophical questions, but never gets up in the morning and never knows how to cook or get things done. But the neuroscientist needs to become familiar with some of the why questions, and one of the books that does that is the Bible. The Bible is a study in why. It's not a study in how. And part of the problem is a whole lot of how people have looked at the why book, and they thought, well, this is a really crappy how book. And the answer is, it's not a how book; it's a why book. And so you need to read it by asking the question why, and the why stuff. The Bible never stops being incredibly profound, beginning with Adam and Isha, Adam and Eve, and in a microcosm, giving a description of what human life is like, this desperate need we have to do our own thing and to have knowledge and power at the expense of love and trust, and discovering that by choosing knowledge and power, we forfeit love and trust. And then, the danger is we forfeit it forever, except that God won't let us go. He comes to find us, so that we have knowledge and power and love and trust, and they all come together. If they marry each other, then we become who we're supposed to be. We're supposed to have knowledge. We're supposed to have agency, but it must be set within trust and love. And again, that's the Christian journey. It's matching how and why together, capacity and power with love and trust. But it can only be done through an encounter with Christ, who puts us back together again in His image, because that's how He is.
Well, I think Catherine's channeling Ratzinger, and I think you're channeling Guardini. I don't know. That's like out of his brilliant book, The Lord. Brilliantly put.
Yeah.
And he puts it in Guardini, says something like, not leaving us in our darkness. God breaks into the visceral chaos of our sin, reaches down into the depths and draws us to Himself. Exactly as you said, He doesn't leave us in our darkness. That and understanding that is so beautiful, isn't it? It's such a beautiful thing.
We have a theologian on the panel. This is great. That was so beautifully done, Mark. Really, really lovely. And you hide your knowledge with such humility. It's very impressive.
I was going to bring in another theologian, Newman, and say, I suppose the other thing is that you need to sort of use that thing that Newman said about the illative sense. That it's not that there are that. And I want to say this to Emily, really, is that there's not one answer to any of these questions, which is why a discussion like this, I think, is really valuable, because we've drawn lots of different, we've drawn on lots of different threads. And I think it's about building a picture. Committing yourself to faith is about building a picture where eventually it might not be one argument in particular that convinces you of the truth of this. It might be, but it quite often it's like the weight or the balance of the whole picture. You sort of go, oh, wow, this is really something amazing. Well, certainly that's, I think, my own experience.
And I want to say to Emily, Gavin talked about the how, but the how has become a very forensic question. How do things operate on this level? And that isn't really how we experience life. That isn't really how we live. That doesn't really relate to us in any meaningful way. And if we're honest, we can see that. We don't encounter water and immediately think H2O, even though it is. We encounter that it's wet. So I would also say, you talk about scripture and the why. I'd say it's why and how, because it's also how we really, in the terms of the kind of creature we are. Now, I'm not saying scientifically, forensically, but we look up. We have heaven and earth. We have light and dark. We have things wet and dry, and we encounter things, and they have meaning to us that the Bible describes perfectly well and perfectly adequately, if we don't overlay it with this forensic scientism. that I think when we do that, we're saying, I can't possibly understand it because I'm looking at it with these modern eyes.
Totally, yeah.
But it does, in fact, have answers if we're able to see that, if we look at it in terms of how we experience life, who we are in relation to one another, who we are in relation to God, our creator, and what that looks like. It does feel like we're at the center of the universe. It feels
one
like
of the most
the
extraordinary
center of the universe. We're not, but it feels, but that's how we experience it.
One of the most extraordinary things that's happened in the last couple of years is that one of the cleverest psychologists of our age, Jordan Peterson, who's an agnostic, has picked up Genesis, and he's begun to explain how true Genesis is from a psychological point of view. Now, on the whole, again, there are two kinds of psychology. There's there's how and why. There's the developmental and what's the other kind of clinical, essentially. But what he's done is he's working his way through Genesis and now Exodus with a panel of people. And without being a signed up believer, he's simply saying everything I know about the human condition as a psychologist is to be found and unpacked in these early books of the Bible. Yeah. What an extraordinary journey of discovery this is, which is one of the reasons why we spend quite a lot of our time reading the Bible, not because we don't know what's in there, but because it comes at us. It comes at us in a fresh way each time. And again, this is happening in a relationship. So God, who's behind everything, takes the period of life that we're at and says, well, I think you're ready for the next level. And then we read something we've read 1,000 times before. We go, oh my God, look at that. I never saw that before. I'm ready for this now. I'll start living it. So it's extremely exciting. And for someone like me, who's a very slow learner and making terribly slow progress, I'm just so grateful I keep on getting an opportunity to keep on discovering stuff. And I think, well, how on earth did I manage without knowing and experiencing and trusting this before? But so this journey of discovery in the faith is really completely wonderful, and it's quite wonderful. It's quite marvelous to see a clever agnostic do it so effectively as Jordan Peterson does. So to as well as listening to us, watch a real pro.
Well, it's about asking the right questions as well, isn't it? If you take something simple like the story of the boy who cried wolf, if you ask the question, where are the bones of the dead boy and the sheep and which hill and where can I find it and what are the locations, you're asking the wrong questions. Is it or is it not true that if you lie, people will stop trusting you? Is it or is it not true that danger lurks around and that you can prevent danger by community? Are these things perennial truths? Yes. Are they best revealed through story? Yes. Does Christ use parables to reveal truth? Yes. Does it mean they're false? What do you mean by true and false? You know what? You're not going to get an answer by this sort of scientific analysis unless your question is, what was the DNA makeup of the boy who cried wolf? But that's just a useless question anyway. So yeah, I think what's good about the question from Emily is that she's asking the right questions. And
I'm coming to the end of my time at the moment.
You have you got 1 minute?
Yes.
I wanted to say as well about what I would want to say to anybody who's coming at things from a scientific perspective is, where do you get your value judgment from as well? So what grounds your value? You believe that this is right, but why do you believe that's right? So that all comes into it as well.
There speaks the philosopher, well trained. So you've had a philosopher and a theologian and another. Anyway, now what we need is criticism from Emily and further questions.
Yes, please. Okay. Well, are we done, Mark?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Well, I want to end just with love, because this was for Emily. We love you. You're loved, and you're loved into existence by a creator who loves you. And we can love you because of that creator. That's how we can love you. And there's more I'll talk to you about when you come round. And I look forward to seeing you. And thank you for everyone for indulging the question from my stepdaughter. And hello and goodbye, Emily. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden, fading into the evening shadow.
You're a bit.
Yes, but clinging on to the light, which gets ever brighter as the darkness grows.
What is it? Ex umbris.
In lux
going.
aeternum or something. Yes.
Light. Let there be light.
There we go.
Good stuff. If anyone else has got any questions that they are desperate for answers to, or that we can help with, then please do leave them in the comments, and we'll try to do our best to sort of give some answers.